Walking into a stadium carrying a full cooler was just what you did. Glass bottles clinked together inside. Nobody stopped you. Security barely glanced. You'd find your seat, pop open a cold one, and unwrap sandwiches like you were setting up a picnic. The whole section felt like one big family reunion under the lights. Playgrounds back then were survival courses disguised as fun. Metal structures heated by the sun until they could brand you. Spinning platforms that launched kids into orbit. Concrete waiting below to teach you physics the hard way. Parents sat on benches, smoking, chatting, trusting gravity to sort things out. Somehow we all made it. High schools designated smoking areas for students. Official zones marked by the administration where teenagers could light up between algebra and history. Teachers walked past without flinching. The courtyards filled with haze and conversation. Nobody called it a crisis yet. It was just part of the landscape. The gas crisis changed how people drove and thought. Odd even rationing based on license plates. Long lines snaking around blocks. Folks hoarding fuel in milk jugs, coffee cans, anything that held liquid. Garages reeked of gasoline. Desperation had a smell, and it hung in the air like humidity. After they dropped the speed limit to 55, CB radios became the highway's nervous system. Families cruised interstates while Dad worked the microphone, warning about smokies ahead. Handles like rubber duck, and Breaker 19 filled the airways. Long drives turned into rolling conversations with strangers who felt like neighbors. Open containers in cars were normal as keys in the ignition. Beer between the knees, mixed drink in a solo cup. Nobody thought twice. The concept of open container laws came later. Back then, a Friday night cruise meant windows down, music up, and something cold in hand. Block parties meant whole pigs roasting in oil drum smokers. Smoke billowed down the street. Kids weaved between folding tables loaded with potato salad and deviled eggs. No permits requested. No inspections scheduled. Just neighbors gathering, eating, laughing, until the mosquitoes drove everyone inside. Pilots lit cigarettes in the cockpit mid-flight. Passengers didn't notice, because the cabin already looked like a fog bank. Ashtrays in every armrest. The smell of burning tobacco mixed with jet fuel and recycled air. Nobody complained. That was just how flying smelled. Someone would rent a 16mm film, hang a bedsheet on their garage, and invite the block over. Families dragged lawn chairs and coolers. Kids ran wild while the projector clattered. No licenses, no permits. Just neighbors, movies, and warm summer nights under the stars. Snow tires came studded with metal teeth that bit into ice and chewed up asphalt. They left grooves and scars on every road. Many states allowed them anyway. The crunch and grind of studded tires was winter's soundtrack, even if it destroyed the pavement by spring. Flying coach meant free drinks, real alcohol. Flight attendants wheeled carts and poured gin, whiskey, wine for anyone who asked. No fees, no age checks. Travelers toasted at 30,000 feet like they were at a cocktail party. Even the cheapest seats felt luxurious. Roller rinks were thick with smoke. Ashtrays lined the snack bar. Parents puffed from the bleachers. Even the DJ might have had a cigarette dangling while he spun records. The haze mixed with disco lights and organ music as kids circled the floor. Nobody said a word about secondhand smoke. Truck parades rolled through town, tossing candy directly into the street. Kids darted between moving vehicles, diving for Tootsie Rolls and gumdrops. Parents clapped and cheered. Safety wasn't part of the equation. It was tradition, excitement, small-town summer at its finest. Cigarette companies ran booths at county fairs, handing out free merchandise. Hats, matches, lighters, even sample packs. Families walked by with children in tow. Tobacco logos covered banners, racetracks, even carnival rides. Advertising at its most aggressive, years before lawyers and regulations changed the game. Concert festival seating meant chaos. Gates opened and fans surged toward the stage. No assigned seats. No barriers. Just a mass of bodies pressing forward. It was loud, sweaty, dangerous, and fans called it electric. Tight security and designated seating came later, turning those wild nights into history. City buses came equipped with ashtrays on the floor and flip-open ceiling vents. Drivers smoked with one hand on the wheel. Passengers lit up behind them. The air grew thick and yellow. Nobody complained. It was just the atmosphere of public transportation. Backyard pools had no fences, no alarms, no self-closing gates. Neighborhood kids wandered in on hot afternoons. Sometimes no adults around at all. Just water, sunshine, and trust. Today it would bring lawsuits and inspectors. Back then it was just summer. Chlordane was sprayed heavy around house foundations for termites. Powerful stuff meant to last decades. Homeowners used it liberally. Later it got banned for health reasons. But in the 70s, it was just the smell of pest control done right. Dime stores sold tiny turtles in plastic bowls. No warnings about salmonella. Kids played with them on kitchen tables. It wasn't until 1975 that the government banned selling turtles under 4 inches. Before that, they were everywhere. Dish soaps and laundry detergents were loaded with phosphates. Made water soft, dishes sparkle, suds foam high. Also fed algae blooms downstream. Nobody thought about what drained away. They just knew their clothes looked whiter, and their sinks bubbled with satisfaction. Municipal dumps burned trash nightly. Trucks dumped the day's haul. Someone lit a match. By evening, smoke curled into the sky. Kids biked out to watch the flames. Adults shrugged. Recycling programs hadn't caught on. Burning garbage was just how cities managed waste. Helmets for bike-riding kids were practically non-existent. If someone showed up wearing one, they got teased for being overcautious. Skinned knees, chipped teeth, a few scars were seen as part of growing up. Safety campaigns came later. Back then, the only protection was wind in your hair. Auto shop classes taught real mechanical work, but waste oil and gasoline got dumped straight outside or down floor drains. Students drained cars into open pans. Learning by doing, not by safety manual. Today, the EPA would shut it down instantly. Then it was just part of shop class. Families desmogged new cars by removing catalytic converters and smog pumps. People thought emissions equipment robbed engines of power. Off it came in backyard garages. Nobody blinked at the smoke curling from tailpipes. It was considered smart tinkering, not environmental tampering. Hunting rifles displayed proudly on living room wall racks. Windows left open, screens rattling in summer breezes. Nobody worried about theft or liability. Guns were tools, not taboos. Visitors might comment on craftsmanship instead of raising eyebrows. Home fuse boxes weren't always maintained properly. Fuse blew, plenty of folks stuck a penny behind it and screwed it back in. Lights came on, so did fire risk. It was the poor man's fix, whispered about as clever, though it left houses one spark from disaster. Little league fields got chalked by hand, with lime tossed from buckets. Kids inhaled dust clouds while lines were drawn, coughing, laughing, unconcerned. Coaches wiped chalky hands on their pants and went back to the game. Protective masks and safety gear were unheard of. Hitchhiking crept into carpools during gas shortages. If someone walked your direction, you pulled over and said hop in. Neighbors, friends, complete strangers catching lifts. It wasn't seen as risky. Sharing rides was practical necessity. School field trips went straight into factories. Kids walked within feet of stamping presses, molten metal, conveyor belts. Teachers pointed things out. Hard hats and safety glasses weren't standard. Students wore regular school clothes. Lessons were unforgettable, if a bit dangerous. Bank tellers cashed sizable checks with nothing more than a signature and a smile. No photo ID, no electronic verification. Just a familiar face and maybe a glance at account balance. Trust-based systems that feel unimaginable in today's fraud-conscious world. Teenagers worked night shifts at gas stations, diners, corner stores. Barely old enough to drive themselves there. Labor laws weren't tightly enforced. Kids spent long hours alone handling cash, pumping fuel, serving burgers. Parents called it character building. Today, it would bring legal issues instantly. Police finding teenagers breaking curfew usually meant a stern lecture and a ride home. No citations, no paperwork, no court dates. Just verbal warnings meant to scare kids straight. Officers saw themselves as neighborhood guardians, not paper pushers. That leniency is rare in modern policing. Sending a child to fly alone was simple. Paper ticket, small pin with airline logo, flight attendant keeping casual watch. No IDs, no TSA lines, no background checks. Parents waved goodbye at the gate. Kids felt adventurous. Travel on trust, not paperwork. Cleaning products carried few warnings, and most had no child-proof caps. Bleach, lye, ammonia sat under kitchen sinks in brightly colored bottles. Parents taught caution, but accidents weren't rare. Today's bold labels and locking caps make old packaging seem reckless. Back then, it was standard household fare. Beauty salons filled with cigarette smoke mixed with aerosol hairspray. Customers sat under giant hood dryers, puffing away, while stylists sprayed CFC-laced lacquer into the air. No smoking signs hung ironically above the haze. Nobody stopped the routine. Police cruisers had no cages, cameras, or partitions. Just bench seats. Some departments offered ride-alongs to curious high schoolers as career day opportunities. Kids sat up front, police radio buzzing, watching traffic stops. Insurance and liability alone would prevent such practices today. When winter froze lakes solid, families drove cars and trucks right onto the ice for fishing. No permits, no ropes, no safety checks, just common sense and confidence in thickness. Pickup beds became shelters. Kids played hockey on the surface. Ordinary winter fun. Drugstores sold glass thermometers filled with mercury and reusable glass syringes. Parents bought them, sterilized them at home, kept them for years. Part of family medicine cabinets. Today, the idea of mercury in a child's mouth or home stock of syringes would bring immediate concern. City fireworks shows were volunteers lighting fuses in parking lots. Coffee cans for spent shells. Rope lines for safety. Spectators sat on blankets yards away, flinching at booms. Permits, professionals, barricades came later. In the 70s, homemade spectacle. Farm kids 12 or 13 drove tractors and wagons on public roads during harvest. A wave from passing sheriffs was enough approval. No escort vehicles. No flashing lights. Just a kid pulling grain at a crawl, proudly part of family work. Today, it would draw tickets and questions. Science class included backyard-style rocket launches using baking soda and vinegar, or sturdier metal launch rods for serious projects. Goggles and safety gear weren't part of the plan. Teachers clapped as students lit fuses or flipped switches. Today, risk assessments alone would cancel the lesson. Backyard tire swings hung from frayed ropes on sturdy trees. Hard-packed dirt below. No foam mats. Kids doubled up, spinning and crashing, laughing through bruises. Parents watched from porches or didn't watch at all. Rough edges of childhood were considered part of the fun. Dropping off film meant camera clerks opened your envelope and flipped through prints, commenting on nice vacations or good shots of kids. Privacy wasn't part of the deal. Strangers handled every photo from beach trips to birthday parties. Accepted, even expected in the pre-digital age. Steering wheel spinners, those one-handed knobs bolted onto rims, were everywhere on family cars. Made tight turns effortless, especially backing into driveways. You could buy one at gas stations. They could jam or spin wildly if mishandled, but convenience and that slick, confident feel mattered more than liability. County roads, especially rural ones, wound along cliffs and sharp curves without guardrails in sight. Simple yellow warning signs were considered enough. Drivers knew to take it slow, but accidents were common. Lack of barriers seemed shocking now. Back then, just part of country driving. Shop class sometimes involved casting molten aluminum into sand molds. Students in sneakers and t-shirts poured liquid metal, sparks flying, with little more than teacher's nod of caution. Protective shields, gloves, goggles weren't required. Kids learned real-world skills and risks today's codes would never allow. Teenagers interested in science could order chemistry glassware by mail. Flasks, burners, condensers, no questions asked. Marketed as educational for school projects or science fairs. Parents rarely hesitated, even though kids could experiment with volatile chemicals at home. That hands-off trust feels unbelievable in today's regulatory climate. Traveling vendors drove vans through neighborhoods sharpening knives and scissors right at curbs. Housewives passed out kitchen blades, chatting while sparks flew from grinders. Payment was small cash. No paperwork. No scheduling. A service that faded fast, but was routine on quiet streets in the 70s. Neighborhood dogs roamed freely, following kids to school in mornings, chasing bikes in afternoons, sleeping near ball fields. Collars and leashes were optional. Neighbors knew every dog by name. Strays blended in. Carefree times before leash laws and liability worries made free-roaming pets rare. Cold nights meant kerosene heaters even in poorly ventilated rooms. Windows barely cracked. The smell hung heavy, but took the chill off. Parents warned kids not to touch hot grates. That was about it. Today, fire marshals and safety inspectors would recoil at the risk. Cigarette vending machines stood in restaurants, motels, bowling alleys, glowing with neon logos. Kid with handful of quarters could pull the lever and get a fresh pack. No questions asked. Nobody checked IDs or thought twice. By the 80s, they were getting pushed out. In the 70s, they blended into everyday life. Asbestos was everywhere. Ceiling tiles, floor tiles, pipe wrap, even stage curtains in schools and auditoriums. Nobody gave second thought to fibers floating in air. Custodians swept dust with bare hands. Entire generations spent school years surrounded by the stuff with not a single warning label or hazard sign in sight. Phone books landed on every doorstep, big as bricks, with names, addresses, numbers of everyone in town printed in black and white. Privacy wasn't part of the conversation. Considered public service. If you wanted to call a stranger or drop by, you flipped pages, and there they were, listed right there. 3 martini lunches were more than jokes. They were business rituals. Executives lingered over steaks and cocktails for hours, closing deals with handshakes instead of contracts. By the time checks came, afternoons were gone. Today, it would raise eyebrows and HR flags. Back then, just good networking. Roadside fireworks stands popped up every summer, stocked with bottle rockets, cherry bombs, strings of firecrackers. Kids wandered up with couple bucks from mowing lawns and walked away with bags of explosives. Sellers rarely asked age, just smiled and made change. Neighborhoods lit up at night with bangs and sparks on every block. Sneaking friends into drive-ins and trunks was half the fun. Teens folded themselves into cramped spaces, whispering not to cough or laugh while cars rolled past ticket booths. Attendants knew it happened and mostly shrugged. Once inside, trunks popped open, spilling crowds ready for soda, popcorn, double features. When oil crisis hit, Gas lines stretched for blocks. People sat with engines off, windows down, radios on low. Some brought coffee. Others brought cards. It wasn't just a line. It was a new part of life. When your tank finally filled, you didn't just drive home. You celebrated. First digital watches felt like gadgets from the future. Red LED numbers lit up with dramatic button presses. You made sure everyone saw. You didn't just check time. You presented it. And if it had stopwatch, forget it. That thing ran your whole recess kingdom. The world felt smaller. No internet, no constant pings. Just phone calls, letters, neighbors who waved when they passed. People knew your name at stores. You borrowed sugar. You shared things. It wasn't perfect, but it was close. That closeness stuck. You knew you'd made it sliding behind the wheel of a Chevy Impala, Cutlass Supreme, or Ford LTD, the size of small boats. You didn't drive. You cruised. Long hoods, wide seats, soft suspension, enough metal to survive demolition derbies. They weren't cars. They were kingdoms on wheels. You didn't just watch Happy Days. You lived for it. Fonzie wasn't just a character. He was a movement. Cool without trying. Jacket over shoulder. One eyebrow raised. Whole living rooms smiled. For 1/2 hour a week, the world slowed down. You believed maybe, just maybe, you could be that cool too. Brown shag carpeting didn't match anything and somehow matched everything. Thick, warm, absolutely impossible to vacuum clean. Kids got lost in it. Pets sank into it. Static shocks waited around every corner, but it was the look. Every house had it, even if nobody could explain why. Houses in 1970 cost around $17,000. By mid-70s, you'd need double that. People still groaned about prices, but owning homes was normal, not pipe dreams. You painted yourself, mowed on weekends, probably knew every neighbor on the block by name. If your kitchen didn't have avocado green somewhere, were you even trying? Mix in burnt orange countertops, and you had the culinary color scheme of the decade. Everything felt funky. Somehow food tasted better when fridges looked like guacamole and cabinets looked like Halloween. Jamming 8 tracks into dashboards was ritual. The click, the slide, the hope it wouldn't switch tracks mid-song. You didn't mind even when it looped back to beginnings. You just wanted music loud and roads long. If tapes got stuck, you prayed and pulled gently. After seeing Saturday Night Fever, you tried the moves in socks on kitchen floors, mirrors in hallways, maybe little spins when no one watched. You weren't John Travolta, but for minutes you felt like you were. That was enough to keep dancing way past bedtime. Everyone had CB radios, or wanted them. You picked call signs, practiced lingo, hoped someone cool was on Channel 19. It wasn't just for truckers anymore. It was social media before social media. 10-4, good buddy, over and out. Sidewalks sparkled with silver tabs from soda cans. You'd pop one off, flick with your thumb, watch it skitter like hockey pucks. Nobody picked them up. Nobody blinked. Just part of scenery. Metallic confetti from a country running on fizzy sugar. You swore Tab and Fresca were good for you. Not just diet sodas, futuristic elixirs, fizzy, bitter, strangely addicting. When you cracked one open in front of friends, you felt ahead of your time. Nobody knew what was in them. Nobody asked. Bell-bottoms didn't just cover shoes. They devoured them. Denim swept sidewalks, caught breezes, made you feel like walking on air. The wider they were, the cooler you were. If they had embroidery on pockets, you were practically untouchable. Mood rings promised magic. You'd stare hoping they turned right colors, like they actually knew how you felt. Mostly they sat purple or brown. You tried acting mysterious. Every now and then they hit green and you swore they understood you. Sort of. You didn't wear boom boxes. You carried them like crowns, rested on shoulders, turned up just loud enough to tick off neighbors. Funk, rock, didn't matter. If you had batteries and attitude, you were mobile and whole blocks heard you coming. First time listening to Dark Side of the Moon with headphones was discovering new planets. The heartbeat, the clocks, echoing voices. You laid on carpet, eyes closed, let it take you somewhere else. You didn't move, didn't talk. You listened. Lava lamps weren't just decorations. They were experiences. You turned them on, waited eternities, then finally blobby magic. Wax floated, split, rejoined. You didn't look at them. You looked into them. Somehow it made everything feel calmer. Earth shoes weren't about fashion. They were about alignment. Weird slants made you feel like walking uphill in reverse. But if brochures said they fixed posture, you believed it, even if they looked like something garden gnomes might wear. McCrane wasn't craft. It was movement. Every window had hanging plants held up by rope knots and love. Some homemade, some store-bought, but all swayed slightly in breezes. For a while, it felt like every corner had its own little jungle. You gathered around TVs to watch Bicentennial like it was moon landings. Red, white, blue flooded every channel. Parades, music, fireworks. Felt like whole country was dressing up for birthdays. We were lucky to be invited. Star Wars lines wrapped around buildings. You didn't know what you were about to see, just that your cousin saw it twice and wouldn't shut up. Then lights went down. Screens lit up. Suddenly, you weren't in the 70s anymore. You were in galaxies far, far away. Average American households brought in just under $10,000 a year in 1970. By decade's end, it almost doubled. You weren't getting rich, but you could pay bills, take summer trips, still treat families to Friday night pizza without sweating hard. Gas was cheap until it wasn't. Early in decade, you could fill tanks for under $4. Once oil crisis hit, prices nearly tripled. Suddenly, just a drive became maybe we wait. People bought smaller cars, carpooled more, kept eyes on pumps like never before. Casey Kasem counted them down every weekend. You sat in cars, fingers crossed, hoping favorite songs made top 5. When they did, you rolled windows down, turned dials up, sang every word like whole highways were your stages. You sat cross-legged on carpet, squinting at screens, holding joysticks like spaceship controls. Pong wasn't flashy, but back then felt like futures. 2 rectangles and square balls bouncing back and forth. Somehow you could play for hours and still argue over who cheated. School papers came home with faint purple ink, fresh from mimeograph machines. Smells hit first, then smudges, then realizations they were probably crooked, blurry, barely legible. But they were official and meant school happened. You'd sniff once and tuck into folders like gold. Typing on electric typewriters wasn't quiet work. They roared, clacked, hummed like motorbikes inside. Every letter punched pages with authority. You made typos, slapped correction tape, kept going. When pages were done, you pulled them out with snaps like finishing masterpieces. You dropped off rolls of film at photomats, handed them through tiny drive-up windows, waited days for magic. Would photos be blurry, overexposed, glorious? Who knew? You just hoped your thumbs weren't in every shot. Those little kiosks were gateways to memories or disappointments. Writing letters wasn't tasks. They were moments. You picked best pens, found decent paper, curled into chairs. You wrote in cursive, full loops, perfect lines, maybe added doodles in margins. Then sealed with care and hoped people on other ends smiled. You opened lunch bags inside. Bologna again, white bread, maybe slices of cheese if you were lucky, cookies smashed flat from juice boxes. It wasn't glamorous, but dependable. Every kid at tables had something similar, the culinary shrug of school days. TV reception was constant battles. You fiddled with rabbit ears, added aluminum foil, tilted whole sets, held your breath. One sneeze from across rooms could ruin everything. But when it worked, crystal clearish magic. You learned perfect static-free channels were earned, not given. Beanbag chairs promised comfort but delivered chaos. You flopped down, sank too deep, tried not getting stuck. Always a little too lumpy, a little too flat, somehow perfect. You dragged them room to room like pets. When they tore, styrofoam snowstorms. You didn't grasp gravity of Nixon resigning. Not really, but you remember where you were. Living rooms, the hush, black and white images on boxy TVs. Adults tense, kids confused. Walter Cronkite sounding like disappointed dads. History happened. You felt it even if you didn't understand yet. Grandma's coffee tables weren't complete without glass grapes. Purple or green, always glossy, with stems like driftwood. Nobody knew where they came from. Nobody touched them. Just there, heavy, decorative, slightly mysterious, like forbidden snacks from fancy alien fruit bowls. You laced up skates, threw on striped socks, headed into neon lights of roller discos. Music thumped, lights pulsed. Everyone tried looking cool without falling. You didn't skate. You grooved. If you crashed into walls, you laughed, brushed off, kept rolling. Jell-O was dessert, salad, question mark with carrots, maybe cottage cheese. No one knew why it existed, but it did. You spooned politely at potlucks, nodded like it made sense, quietly hoped real dessert waited nearby. Still, that wobble had personality. Something satisfying about rolling down windows with cranks. That clicky resistance, feeling of control, workouts for forearms. When you got it just right, not too open, not too breezy, you felt like car whispers. Then someone complained, and you had to do it all over again. Growing up without screens meant noticing more. Colors of sunsets, hums of summer nights, ways time seemed to stretch. You weren't chasing updates or scrolling through noise. Life moved slower but richer. Worlds outside weren't background. They were everything. Looking back, now it's hard not missing how big life felt when it was simpler.